When my sister-in-law texted me that I was no longer welcome at Thanksgiving because my ex-husband would be bringing his new girlfriend, I didn't cry. I didn't beg. Instead, I did something that left my entire former family speechless. I opened the doors of my $2 million Vermont estate to complete strangers, and what happened next became the most satisfying revenge I could have ever imagined. Sometimes the best way to handle being thrown away is to show them exactly what they lost. My name is Rachel Monroe, and at 36, I thought I had finally figured out how to rebuild my life from the ashes of a devastating divorce. 6 months ago, I signed the papers that officially ended my 12-year marriage to Daniel Harper, a man who had systematically crushed my spirit before ultimately betraying me with a 24-year-old colleague named Jessica. The ink on those divorce papers was barely dry when I made the most empowering decision of my adult life. I bought myself a $2 million estate in the heart of Vermont. The house was everything Daniel said I could never have. "You're too impractical for something that grand," he used to tell me whenever I'd admire beautiful homes in magazines. "We need to be realistic about our limitations." But standing in the circular driveway of my new home for the first time, watching the October sun cast golden light across the sprawling colonial facade, I realized that the only limitation I'd ever had was him. The estate sat on 47 acres of pristine Vermont wilderness, with the Green Mountains rising majestically in the distance like ancient guardians. The house itself was a masterpiece of early American architecture, built in 1862 by a railroad baron who understood that some things in life are worth the investment. Wide plank hardwood floors gleamed throughout the 8-bedroom, 6-bathroom interior, and the kitchen. My God, the kitchen was something straight out of a culinary magazine, with marble countertops, professional-grade appliances, and enough space to feed an army. The dining room could easily accommodate 20 people around its massive mahogany table, which came with the house along with most of the antique furnishings. Crown molding lined every ceiling, and original oil paintings of Vermont landscapes adorned the walls. It was the kind of home where important conversations happened, where memories were supposed to be made, where generations of families should gather for holidays and celebrations. As November approached and the leaves transformed into a breathtaking tapestry of reds, oranges, and golds, I found myself filled with an excitement I hadn't felt in years. This would be my first Thanksgiving as a truly independent woman. No more walking on eggshells around Daniel's moods. No more pretending to laugh at his father's inappropriate jokes. No more enduring his mother's passive-aggressive comments about my cooking or my career or my inability to give them grandchildren. I had it all planned out. I would invite my younger sister Sarah and her family, my college roommate Lisa, who was flying in from California, and maybe a few neighbors I'd met since moving to town. We'd gather around that magnificent dining table, and I'd finally have the warm, genuine Thanksgiving I'd been craving for over a decade. I even bought new China delicate blue and white spode that reminded me of my grandmother's dishes and spent hours on Pinterest planning the perfect menu. The call came on a Tuesday evening in mid-November, just as I was reviewing turkey recipes. I was curled up in the library, which had become my favorite room in the house, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and warmed by a crackling fire in the stone fireplace. When I saw Marianne's name on my phone screen, I actually smiled. Daniel's sister and I had never been close, but I thought maybe the divorce would give us a chance to build a more authentic relationship. "Hi, Marianne," I answered, settling deeper into the leather armchair. "How are you?" "Rachel, hi." Her voice sounded strained, almost guilty. "Listen, I need to talk to you about Thanksgiving." My stomach dropped before she even continued. There was something in her tone, that careful, measured way she spoke when she was about to deliver bad news, but wanted to sound reasonable about it. "What about Thanksgiving?" I asked, though I was already bracing myself. "Well, it's just that this is really difficult, and I want you to know that I don't want to hurt your feelings." "Marianne, just say it." She took a deep breath. "Daniel called Mom yesterday. He's bringing Jessica to dinner, and honestly, It would just be really awkward if you were there too. You understand? Right, I mean. It's still so fresh, and with the family dynamics and everything. The words hit me like a physical blow. I sat there in my beautiful library, surrounded by my beautiful things in my beautiful house, and felt smaller than I had in months. "So you're uninviting me," I said quietly. "It's not that we don't want you there," she rushed to explain. "It's just that Daniel is still technically family, and Jessica is, well, she's going to be around for a while, so we need to start including her in family events. You understand how complicated this is?" I understood perfectly. After 12 years of marriage, after 12 years of sitting at their table and pretending to enjoy their company, after 12 years of being the dutiful daughter-in-law who brought the perfect side dishes and helped clean up afterward, I was expendable. Daniel cheating, lying. Daniel got to keep the family, while I got nothing but a polite dismissal delivered with fake concern for my feelings. "Of course," I heard myself say in a voice that sounded remarkably calm. "I understand completely." "Oh, good. I was so worried you'd be upset. I knew you'd be reasonable about this." Reasonable. As if being discarded like yesterday's newspaper was a reasonable thing to accept gracefully. After I hung up, I sat in that library for hours, staring into the fire and feeling the familiar ache of rejection settle into my bones. But this time, something was different. This time, instead of the crushing shame I'd felt throughout my marriage, I felt something else entirely, a slow-burning anger that had nothing to do with sadness and everything to do with power. The memories came flooding back as I sat there in the dying firelight, each one a fresh wound reopening. Daniel Harper hadn't just cheated on me, he had systematically dismantled my self-worth over the course of our 12-year marriage, brick by brick, until I barely recognized the confident woman I used to be. It started small, as these things always do. Little comments about my cooking being a bit ambitious when I tried new recipes. Gentle suggestions that maybe I should tone down my enthusiasm during dinner parties because I was overwhelming the other guests. Subtle eye rolls when I expressed opinions that differed from his, followed by patronizing explanations about why I was missing the bigger picture. By year 5, I had learned to stay quiet during family gatherings. By year 8, I was apologizing for things that weren't my fault. By year 10, I genuinely believed that Daniel was doing me a favor by staying married to someone as fundamentally flawed as I apparently was. The Harper family had been his willing accomplices in this slow assassination of my spirit. Marianne, with her syrup-sweet voice and razor-sharp tongue, had perfected the art of the backhanded compliment. "Oh, Rachel, you're so brave to wear that color," she'd say, making it sound like I'd committed a fashion felony. I could never pull off something so bold. Daniel's mother, Patricia, was even worse. She had a gift for making me feel like an intruder in my own life. Every holiday, every birthday, every family gathering became an exercise in subtle humiliation. She'd rearrange the dishes I brought to more appropriate spots on the table. She'd correct my stories in front of everyone, adding details that made me look foolish or forgetful. She'd ask pointed questions about why Daniel and I hadn't given her grandchildren yet, always in front of an audience, always with that concerned grandmother expression that made me feel like a complete failure as a woman. "Daniel deserves a wife who can support his ambitions," she told me once, when she thought he was out of earshot. "Someone who builds him up instead of always needing to be the center of attention." The center of attention. That's what they called it when I expressed an opinion, when I laughed too loudly at a joke, when I tried to contribute to conversations about books or politics or anything that mattered to me. I was attention-seeking. I was exhausting. I was too much. And Daniel played the role of the long-suffering husband to perfection. He'd give these tired little sighs when I spoke, as if my very existence was wearing him down. He'd make jokes at my expense that weren't quite cruel enough to call out, but cut deep enough to leave scars. "You know, Rachel," he'd say to his friends, "she's got opinions about everything. I can't even watch the news in peace anymore." The worst part was how reasonable they all made it sound. They weren't being mean, they were helping me become a better person. They weren't criticizing me, they were offering constructive feedback. They weren't isolating me, they were teaching me how to fit in better with the family dynamic. I became a ghost in my own life, floating through days and weeks and months without making waves, without taking up space, without demanding anything for myself. I stopped pursuing the photography career I'd once dreamed of because Daniel needed me to be more present in our marriage. I stopped calling my old friends because they weren't really a good influence on our relationship. I stopped reading the books I loved because they made me pretentious at dinner parties. And then came Jessica, 24 years old, fresh out of graduate school, with the kind of bright-eyed enthusiasm that I'd once possessed before the Harper family ground it out of me. She worked in Daniel's marketing firm, and according to him, she was refreshingly uncomplicated. Not like me, with my messy emotions and inconvenient needs and exhausting habit of having thoughts about things. I found out about the affair in the most humiliating way possible through a screenshot that Daniel's cousin accidentally sent to me instead of his brother. It was a photo from the company Christmas party, showing Daniel and Jessica in what was very clearly not a professional embrace. When I confronted him, he didn't even have the decency to deny it. "I didn't mean for it to happen," he said, not looking at me. "But Rachel, we've been unhappy for so long. You have to admit that." We've been unhappy, as if my misery had been a mutual decision we'd made together. "Jessica makes me feel like myself again," he continued. "She doesn't analyze everything I say or turn every conversation into a debate. She's just easy to be with." Easy. Unlike me, with my complicated feelings about being treated like a second-class citizen in my own marriage. Unlike me, with my unreasonable expectation that my husband should actually like and respect me. The divorce proceedings were swift and brutal. Daniel's family closed ranks around him immediately, painting me as the vindictive ex-wife who was trying to destroy a good man out of spite. Never mind that I asked for nothing beyond what was legally mine. Never mind that I never once badmouthed Daniel publicly, despite having enough ammunition to obliterate his reputation. Never mind that I handled the entire dissolution of our life together with more grace than he deserved. Marianne had been particularly venomous during those final months. "I hope you're happy," she told me the day I came to collect my remaining belongings from the house Daniel and I had shared. "You've broken up a family over your own selfishness." My selfishness. My inability to gracefully accept being cheated on and discarded had somehow made me the villain in their story. But sitting there in my library, surrounded by my books and my beautiful things in my beautiful house, I realized something that should have been obvious months ago. I didn't need their forgiveness. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need anything from the Harper family except for them to leave me alone. The phone call from Marianne wasn't just about Thanksgiving dinner. It was a final power play, one last attempt to put me in my place and remind me that even in my new life, even with my financial independence and my gorgeous home, I was still fundamentally unwanted. They expected me to slink away quietly, to spend Thanksgiving alone feeling sorry for myself while they welcomed Daniel's new girlfriend into the family fold. They expected me to accept this latest humiliation with the same defeated grace I'd shown throughout my marriage. But as I sat there watching the embers die in the fireplace, I felt something I hadn't experienced in over a decade, the intoxicating rush of righteous anger. Not the bitter, self-destructive rage that had consumed me during the divorce, but something cleaner and more focused, something that demanded action. I looked around my magnificent library, with its soaring ceilings and hand-carved shelves, and smiled for the first time in days. Marianne had given me a gift without realizing it. She'd freed me from the obligation to care about their opinion ever again. And I knew exactly how I was going to thank her for it. The next morning, I woke up at 6:30 and walked through my house with fresh eyes, seeing it not as the refuge I'd been hiding in, but as the weapon I'd been unconsciously preparing. Every room told a story of success, of independence, of a woman who had not just survived her divorce but had thrived beyond her wildest dreams. The dining room was particularly magnificent in the early morning light. The mahogany table stretched nearly 12 feet, easily capable of seating 20 people when fully extended. Above it hung a crystal chandelier that had probably cost more than most people's cars, casting rainbow prisms across the cream-colored walls. The built-in china cabinet displayed the Spode dinnerware I'd bought service for $16 alongside crystal wine glasses and silver serving pieces that had come with the house. I ran my fingers along the smooth wood of the table and realized something profound. I had everything the Harper family valued: money, status, a beautiful home, social standing, but I had none of the thing they thought mattered most. I didn't have them. And suddenly, that felt like the greatest blessing of my life. I moved into the kitchen, my bare feet silent on the heated stone floors. This room was a chef's fantasy, with its La Cornue range that had cost more than my first car, the Sub-Zero refrigerator that could hold enough food for a small army, and the marble island that could serve as both prep space and casual dining area. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the mountains, where the first snow of the season was already dusting the peaks. Standing there in my silk pajamas, coffee cup in hand, I had an epiphany that hit me like lightning. The Harper family had taught me that family was about blood, about obligation, about enduring people who treated you poorly because that's what you were supposed to do. But what if they were wrong? What if family was actually about choice, about gathering people who genuinely wanted to be in your presence, who celebrated your successes instead of diminishing them? I thought about all the times I'd sat at Patricia Harper's dining table, forcing down her dry turkey and pretending to enjoy Marianne's passive-aggressive commentary, feeling like an outsider among people who were supposedly my closest relatives. I thought about the hollow conversations, the careful avoidance of any topic that might lead to actual intimacy, the way I'd learned to make myself smaller and quieter just to avoid conflict. What if this Thanksgiving could be different? What if, instead of begging for scraps of acceptance from people who had never truly wanted me there anyway, I created something entirely new? The idea began to take shape slowly, like a photograph developing in a dark room. I didn't need the Harper family. I needed people who would appreciate the warmth and beauty I could offer. I needed people who understood what it felt like to be excluded, who would see my invitation not as charity, but as genuine hospitality. I opened my laptop and began researching. How many people in our county would be spending Thanksgiving alone? How many were too far from family to travel home? How many, like me, had been cast out of their traditional celebrations for reasons that said more about their families than about them? The statistics were staggering. According to the Vermont Department of Health, nearly 30% of adults in our area reported feeling socially isolated during the holidays. The local food bank ran a special program for people who had nowhere to go on Thanksgiving. The community college always had a handful of international students who couldn't afford to fly home. The Veterans Center published a notice every year reminding local vets that the holidays could be particularly difficult for those dealing with PTSD or family estrangement. I started making lists, my excitement building with each passing minute. The guest bedrooms could accommodate out-of-town visitors. The living room had enough seating for intimate conversations. The wraparound porch, even in November, was perfect for those who needed fresh air and mountain views. I had space for people to spread out, to find their comfort zones, to be themselves without judgment. But this wouldn't be a charity event. This wouldn't be me playing Lady Bountiful, graciously bestowing my benevolence on the less fortunate. This would be a real Thanksgiving, with real people who had real stories to tell and real reasons to be grateful. It would be everything the Harper family gatherings had never been: authentic, inclusive, and genuinely joyful. I spent the morning calculating numbers. The dining room table could seat 20 comfortably. The kitchen island could accommodate another 8 for a more casual experience. If I opened up the library and the sunroom, I could easily host 40 people without anyone feeling crowded. The logistics were actually exciting rather than overwhelming. I had the space. I had the resources. And for the first time in years, I had the motivation to create something beautiful. The more I planned, the more I realized this wasn't really about revenge at all. It was about reclamation. I was reclaiming the holidays, reclaiming my home, reclaiming my right to celebrate my life with people who actually wanted to be part of it. By noon, I had a complete guest list sketched out, a menu planned that would showcase the kitchen's capabilities, and a timeline that would allow me to prepare everything without losing my mind. I had enough china, crystal, and silver to serve a small wedding reception. I had a house that was designed for entertaining, and I finally had a reason to use it. But the real breakthrough came when I realized that Marianne's phone call hadn't been a rejection, it had been a liberation. She had freed me from the obligation to pretend that their version of family was the only version that mattered. She had given me permission to stop trying to fit into a space that was never meant for me. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts, looking for the number of the community center director I'd met at a charity event last month. If I was going to do this, I was going to do it right. I was going to create the kind of Thanksgiving that people would remember for the rest of their lives. The Harper family could keep their awkward dinner and their unwelcome new addition. I was about to throw the best Thanksgiving celebration our county had ever seen, and they weren't invited. As I dialed the number, I caught sight of my reflection in the kitchen window. For the first time in months, I looked like the woman I used to be before Daniel and his family had convinced me I was too much for this world. I looked powerful, purposeful, and absolutely unstoppable. The woman staring back at me wasn't someone who begged for acceptance. She was someone who created her own. My first call was to Margaret Williams, director of the Hillsdale Community Center. I'd met her at a fundraiser for the local library, and she'd struck me as the kind of no-nonsense woman who could move mountains when she set her mind to it. "Margaret, this is Rachel Monroe. We met at the library benefit last month." "Of course, how's the new house treating you?" "It's wonderful, actually. That's why I'm calling. I want to host an open Thanksgiving dinner for anyone in the community who might be spending the holiday alone. I have space for about 40 people, and I was hoping you might help me get the word out." There was a pause. Then Margaret's voice came back warmer than before. "Rachel, that's incredibly generous. We actually keep a list of people who reach out to us around the holidays, folks who are new to the area, seniors whose families live far away, people going through difficult transitions. Would you be comfortable if I shared your invitation with them?" "That's exactly what I was hoping for." Within an hour, Margaret had connected me with 3 other community organizations. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, I had a preliminary guest list that made my heart race with anticipation. James Morrison, a 73-year-old veteran who'd moved to Vermont after his wife died, hoping the mountains would help heal the grief that was eating him alive. He'd been reaching out to the VA support group, asking if anyone knew where a widower could get a decent Thanksgiving meal. Sophia Rodriguez, a single mother who worked 2 jobs to support her 8-year-old daughter Emma and 5-year-old son Carlos. She'd just started her nursing program at the community college and couldn't afford the gas money to drive home to her family in Massachusetts. Marcus and Tyler, a young couple who'd been disowned by their families for getting married. They'd moved to Vermont 6 months ago for a fresh start, but hadn't built a social circle yet. Eleanor Peterson, 81 years old, whose children lived in California and couldn't make the trip east this year. She'd been a high school English teacher for 43 years and spent her retirement volunteering at the Literacy Center. David Park, a graduate student at the University of Vermont studying environmental science. His family was in South Korea, and he couldn't afford a plane ticket home for such a short break. Each name came with a story, and each story broke my heart a little while simultaneously filling me with purpose. These weren't people who needed my pity. They were people who deserved celebration, who had every right to a beautiful Thanksgiving surrounded by warmth and genuine hospitality. I posted on the local Facebook community groups, crafting my message carefully. "Hello, neighbors. I'm hosting an open Thanksgiving dinner at my home for anyone who would otherwise be spending the holiday alone. Whether you're new to the area, far from family, or just looking for a warm, welcoming place to celebrate, you're invited. No need to bring anything except yourself and any dietary restrictions I should know about. Please message me if you'd like to join us." The responses started trickling in within minutes, then became a steady stream by evening. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from people I'd never met, but who felt comfortable enough to share their stories with a stranger. "Hi, I'm Rebecca. I just got divorced and my kids are with their dad this year. I've been dreading spending Thanksgiving alone in my apartment. This is incredible. I'm Tom, and I'm in recovery. My family relationships are still pretty strained, and I was planning to just work a double shift at the diner to avoid thinking about the holiday. My name is Priya, and I'm an international student at UVM. I've heard so much about American Thanksgiving, but never experienced a real one. By Wednesday evening, I had commitments from 37 people, ranging in age from 5-year-old Carlos to Eleanor at 81. I had vegans and meat lovers, people in recovery who needed non-alcoholic options, a guest who was gluten-free, and 2 people who were diabetic. I had stories of recent losses, new beginnings, brave choices, and fresh starts. I hired Maria Santos, a local caterer who specialized in farm-to-table cuisine, to help me manage the cooking for such a large group. We planned a menu that would honor traditional Thanksgiving flavors while accommodating everyone's needs: 2 turkeys, 1 herb roasted, 1 maple glazed, a glazed ham, roasted vegetables from local farms, 3 different potato preparations, cranberry sauce made with Vermont maple syrup, stuffing, and an array of desserts that included sugar-free options. The shopping took 2 full days. I filled 3 grocery carts at the local market, bought additional chairs and serving pieces from the antique store downtown, and spent a small fortune on flowers from the florist. I wanted every detail to be perfect, not because I was trying to show off, but because these people deserved perfection. They deserved to feel valued and welcomed and celebrated. Wednesday night, as I arranged the last of the centerpiece's autumn leaves and branches I'd gathered from my own property, mixed with white roses and flickering candles, I realized I felt more excited about this Thanksgiving than I had about any holiday in over a decade. My house glowed with warmth and anticipation. Every room was ready to welcome strangers who would hopefully leave as friends. The dining room table was set for 20 with my grandmother's silver and the new Spode china. The kitchen island was arranged for 8 more, and I'd set up a cozy buffet in the library for those who preferred a more casual atmosphere. At 11:30 that night, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Hi, Mrs. Monroe. This is Ashley Harper. I'm Daniel's niece, Marianne's daughter. I saw your Facebook post and I wanted you to know that what you're doing is really beautiful. I wish I could be there instead of at my mom's house. I hope you have the most amazing day tomorrow." I stared at the message for a long time, remembering the quiet, thoughtful teenager who had always seemed uncomfortable at Harper family gatherings. Ashley had been the only one who ever asked me about my photography, who seemed genuinely interested in my opinions about books and movies. I'd always suspected she felt as out of place at those dinners as I did. I typed back, "Thank you, Ashley. That means more to me than you know. I hope your day is wonderful too." But as I turned off the lights and headed upstairs to bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that Ashley's message was about more than just my Thanksgiving dinner. Word was getting around, and tomorrow, the Harper family was going to discover exactly what they'd given up when they decided I wasn't worth including. I woke up at 5:30 on Thanksgiving morning with the kind of nervous energy I hadn't felt since my wedding day, except this time. The butterflies in my stomach were accompanied by genuine excitement rather than dread. The early November sun was just beginning to paint the mountains in shades of gold and rose, and through my bedroom windows, I could see the first guests weren't due to arrive until 2 o'clock, but I had a dozen last-minute details racing through my mind. Maria arrived at 7 sharp, along with her assistant, bringing with them the organized chaos of professional caterers who knew exactly what they were doing. While they took over the kitchen with military precision, I focused on the final touches that would transform my house from beautiful to magical. I adjusted flower arrangements, tested the sound system for the playlist I'd curated a mix of jazz standards and acoustic folk that would provide ambiance without overwhelming conversation, and obsessively checked that every bathroom was stocked with fresh towels and toiletries. I wanted my guests to feel like they were staying at the finest hotel rather than visiting a stranger's home. At 9 o'clock, my phone rang. My sister Sarah's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment, my stomach dropped. I'd told her about my plans, but I wondered if she was calling to talk me out of it, to suggest that maybe I was being a bit dramatic about the whole situation. "Rachel, I just wanted to call and tell you how proud I am of you." The relief in my voice was audible. "Thanks, Sarah. I have to admit, I'm terrified that no one will show up." "Are you kidding from what you've told me? You're going to have the best Thanksgiving any of those people have had in years. I wish I could be there instead of stuck in Boston with Tom's family." "Next year," I promised. "Next year you're invited here." After we hung up, I spent an hour getting ready, choosing my outfit as carefully as if I were attending a state dinner. I settled on a deep burgundy cashmere sweater and well-tailored black pants, elegant but approachable, expensive but not intimidating. I wanted to look like a hostess who had everything under control, even though my hands were shaking slightly as I applied my makeup. At 11:30, Eleanor Peterson called. "Dear, I hope you don't mind, but I've baked 3 pies: apple, pumpkin, and pecan. I know you said not to bring anything, but my hands needed something to do with my nerves." "Eleanor, that's wonderful. I can't wait to try them." "And Rachel, thank you for this. I haven't had anywhere to go for Thanksgiving in 3 years. You're an angel." Similar calls came throughout the morning. Sophia wanted to know if she could bring homemade dinner rolls. Marcus and Tyler had made a cranberry orange relish from a family recipe. David was bringing Korean rice cakes as a cultural contribution to the meal. Each call reinforced what I was beginning to understand. These people weren't just grateful for an invitation, they were excited to contribute, to be part of something special. They wanted to belong as much as I wanted to include them. At 1 o'clock, Maria announced that everything was ready. The turkeys were golden and perfect, resting under elegant silver covers. The side dishes were warming in chafing dishes that made my dining room look like a 5-star restaurant. The house smelled like sage and rosemary and all the warm spices that defined the holiday. I walked through each room one final time, checking everything with the obsessive attention to detail that had once driven Daniel crazy. "You're such a perfectionist," he used to say, making it sound like a character flaw. "Can't you just relax and let things be good enough?" But standing in my dining room, looking at the table set with crystal and silver and flowers, I realized that my perfectionism wasn't a flaw, it was a gift. It was my way of showing people they mattered, that they were worth the effort, that their presence in my home was something to be celebrated. At 1:15, I caught sight of myself in the hallway mirror and felt a moment of pure panic. What if this was all a terrible mistake? What if the conversation was awkward? What if people didn't get along? What if I'd bitten off more than I could chew? But then I remembered sitting in my library just days ago, feeling small and unwanted and dismissed by people who had never truly valued me anyway. I remembered the years of walking on eggshells, of shrinking myself to fit into spaces that were never meant for me, of accepting crumbs of affection from people who should have loved me unconditionally. This wasn't about proving anything to the Harper family. This was about proving something to myself, that I could create the kind of warmth and belonging I'd always craved, that I could be the kind of hostess who made people feel genuinely welcome, that I could build something beautiful from the ashes of what had been destroyed. At 1:30, I received a text that made my blood run cold and my heart race simultaneously. It was from Ashley again. "Aunt Rachel, I'm sitting at Mom's dinner table right now, and all anyone can talk about is your Thanksgiving party. Mom is furious and keeps saying you're doing this for attention. Dad thinks it's pathetic. But Grandma Patricia just said she wishes she could see your house. I think they're all secretly jealous. I hope you know how amazing you are." I read the message 3 times, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Part of me was satisfied that my former in-laws were clearly bothered by my independence and success. But a larger part of me felt genuinely sad for them, sad that they couldn't see past their own resentment to recognize that what I was doing came from a place of genuine generosity rather than spite. I texted back, "Thank you for telling me that, sweetheart. I hope your day gets better." At 1:45, I heard the first car pulling into my driveway. Through the window, I could see James Morrison climbing carefully out of an old Ford pickup truck, carrying what looked like a bottle of wine and wearing a suit that had probably been his best for the past 20 years. My hands were still shaking, but now it was with anticipation rather than fear. In 15 minutes, my house would be full of people who had chosen to spend their holiday with me, people who wanted to be here, people who understood what it meant to create family from intention rather than obligation. I smoothed my sweater, checked my lipstick one last time, and walked toward the front door to welcome the first guest to what I somehow knew would be the most important Thanksgiving of my life. James Morrison stood on my front porch like he was approaching a cathedral, his weathered hands clutching a bottle of wine and his eyes wide with wonder as he took in the sweeping facade of the house. When I opened the door, his face broke into the kind of smile that told me he hadn't had many reasons to smile recently. "Mrs. Monroe, I'm James. I can't tell you how grateful I am for this invitation." "Please, call me Rachel, and I'm the grateful one, thank you for coming." As I led him into the foyer, I watched his reaction to the house. His eyes moved from the crystal chandelier to the original oil paintings to the gleaming hardwood floors, and I could see him taking it all in with the appreciation of someone who understood quality and craftsmanship. "This is magnificent," he said quietly. "My late wife would have loved this place. She had an eye for beautiful things." Within minutes, other guests began arriving in a steady stream. Sophia appeared with Emma and Carlos in tow, the children's eyes huge as they stared up at the soaring ceilings. Eleanor Peterson arrived carrying her promised pies and wearing a navy dress that had probably been elegant 20 years ago but was now simply dignified. Marcus and Tyler came together, both nervous and excited, carrying a glass dish of cranberry relish and looking around like they couldn't quite believe they were really here. Each arrival brought its own small moment of connection. I found myself genuinely invested in learning about these people not out of politeness, but out of real curiosity about their lives and stories. Eleanor had taught high school English for 43 years and could quote entire passages of poetry from memory. David shared stories about his environmental research and his family's farm in South Korea. Sophia spoke with quiet pride about her nursing program while keeping a watchful eye on her children, who were slowly warming up to the other guests. By 3 o'clock, my house was alive with conversation and laughter in a way it had never been before. The formal dining room hosted a lively discussion about books between Eleanor and 3 other guests. The kitchen island had become the gathering spot for parents comparing stories about their children. The library had attracted the quieter souls who preferred smaller group conversations. What struck me most was how naturally everyone seemed to blend together. There was none of the forced cheerfulness that had characterized Harper family gatherings, none of the underlying tension that came from people who felt obligated to be together rather than choosing to be. These were people who genuinely wanted to be here, who appreciated the effort that had gone into creating this experience. Little Carlos had initially hidden behind his mother's legs, but within an hour he was showing James his Pokémon cards and explaining the rules with the serious intensity that only a 5-year-old could manage. James, this 73-year-old veteran who had been dreading spending the holiday alone, was completely absorbed in learning about fictional creatures from a child who had never known his grandfather. Emma, Sophia's 8-year-old daughter, had appointed herself as my assistant hostess, helping me arrange napkins and making sure everyone had something to drink. "This is the most beautiful house I've ever seen," she whispered to me as she helped light the candles on the dining room table. "Are you like a princess?" "No, sweetheart," I told her. "I'm just someone who likes to make beautiful spaces for people I care about." At 4 o'clock, we gathered around the extended dining room table for the meal itself. I had worried about seating arrangements, but everyone seemed to find their natural places. Eleanor next to David, discussing his research, Sophia sitting between her children and Marcus, who turned out to be wonderful with kids, James at the head of the table opposite me, looking more relaxed than he had when he arrived. Before we began eating, I stood up with my wine glass in hand. I want to thank all of you for being here today. A week ago, I thought I would be spending this Thanksgiving alone, and honestly, I was dreading it. But sitting here with all of you, I realize that sometimes life gives us exactly what we need, even when it doesn't look like what we expected. Eleanor raised her glass. To Rachel, for opening her home and her heart to strangers. To new friends, added Marcus. To the best Thanksgiving ever, chimed in Emma, holding up her glass of apple cider. As we ate, the conversation flowed as naturally as wine. These people shared stories about their lives with an openness that took my breath away. Rebecca talked about rebuilding her life after divorce with a courage that inspired me. Tom shared his journey through recovery with a honesty that made everyone at the table nod with understanding and respect. Priya described her first American Thanksgiving with such enthusiasm that we all found ourselves seeing our own traditions through fresh eyes. There was something magical about watching strangers become friends over shared food and genuine conversation. I watched James help Eleanor with her coat when she got chilly. I saw Marcus offering to cut Carlos's turkey when Sophia was busy with something else. I noticed how David and Rebecca had discovered a shared love of hiking and were making plans to explore local trails together. This was what Thanksgiving was supposed to be, not a forced gathering of people bound by obligation, but a chosen celebration of gratitude and connection, not a performance of family harmony, but an authentic expression of human warmth. As the afternoon wore on and the wine flowed and the laughter grew louder, I found myself thinking about the Harper family sitting around Patricia's dining room table. I wondered if Daniel was awkwardly trying to integrate Jessica into conversations she couldn't possibly follow. I wondered if Marianne was making her usual passive-aggressive comments about the food or the decorations. I wondered if anyone at that table was having even a fraction of the genuine fun we were having here. But mostly, I found myself not thinking about them at all. For the first time in over a decade, I was completely present in my own life, surrounded by people who had chosen to be here, creating memories that belonged entirely to me. At 6:30, as we were clearing the dinner plates and preparing for dessert, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting any more guests, and for a moment, I felt a flutter of concern. But nothing could have prepared me for what I saw when I opened the front door. Daniel stood on my porch, with Jessica beside him and Marianne just behind them, all of them looking like they had swallowed something particularly unpleasant. James Morrison stood on my front porch like he was approaching a cathedral, his weathered hands clutching a bottle of wine and his eyes wide with wonder as he took in the sweeping facade of the house. When I opened the door, his face broke into the kind of smile that told me he hadn't had many reasons to smile recently. "Mrs. at Monroe, I'm James. I can't tell you how grateful I am for this invitation." "Please, call me Rachel, and I'm the grateful one, thank you for coming." As I led him into the foyer, I watched his reaction to the house. His eyes moved from the crystal chandelier to the original oil paintings to the gleaming hardwood floors, and I could see him taking it all in with the appreciation of someone who understood quality and craftsmanship. "This is magnificent," he said quietly. "My late wife would have loved this place. She had an eye for beautiful things." Within minutes, other guests began arriving in a steady stream. Sophia appeared with Emma and Carlos in tow, the children's eyes huge as they stared up at the soaring ceilings. Eleanor Peterson arrived carrying her promised pies and wearing a navy dress that had probably been elegant 20 years ago but was now simply dignified. Marcus and Tyler came together, both nervous and excited, carrying a glass dish of cranberry relish and looking around like they couldn't quite believe they were really here. Each arrival brought its own small moment of connection. I found myself genuinely invested in learning about these people not out of politeness, but out of real curiosity about their lives and stories. Eleanor had taught high school English for 43 years and could quote entire passages of poetry from memory. David shared stories about his environmental research and his family's farm in South Korea. Sophia spoke with quiet pride about her nursing program while keeping a watchful eye on her children, who were slowly warming up to the other guests. By 3 o'clock, my house was alive with conversation and laughter in a way it had never been before. The formal dining room hosted a lively discussion about books between Eleanor and 3 other guests. The kitchen island had become the gathering spot for parents comparing stories about their children. The library had attracted the quieter souls who preferred smaller group conversations. What struck me most was how naturally everyone seemed to blend together. There was none of the forced cheerfulness that had characterized Harper family gatherings, none of the underlying tension that came from people who felt obligated to be together rather than choosing to be. These were people who genuinely wanted to be here, who appreciated the effort that had gone into creating this experience. Little Carlos had initially hidden behind his mother's legs, but within an hour he was showing James his Pokémon cards and explaining the rules with the serious intensity that only a 5-year-old could manage. James, this 73-year-old veteran who had been dreading spending the holiday alone, was completely absorbed in learning about fictional creatures from a child who had never known his grandfather. Emma, Sophia's 8-year-old daughter, had appointed herself as my assistant hostess, helping me arrange napkins and making sure everyone had something to drink. "This is the most beautiful house I've ever seen," she whispered to me as she helped light the candles on the dining room table. "Are you like a princess?" "No, sweetheart," I told her. "I'm just someone who likes to make beautiful spaces for people I care about." At 4 o'clock, we gathered around the extended dining room table for the meal itself. I had worried about seating arrangements, but everyone seemed to find their natural places. Eleanor next to David, discussing his research, Sophia sitting between her children and Marcus, who turned out to be wonderful with kids, James at the head of the table opposite me, looking more relaxed than he had when he arrived. Before we began eating, I stood up with my wine glass in hand. "I want to thank all of you for being here today. A week ago, I thought I would be spending this Thanksgiving alone, and honestly, I was dreading it. But sitting here with all of you, I realize that sometimes life gives us exactly what we need, even when it doesn't look like what we expected." Eleanor raised her glass. "To Rachel, for opening her home and her heart to strangers." "To new friends," added Marcus. "To the best Thanksgiving ever," chimed in Emma, holding up her glass of apple cider. As we ate, the conversation flowed as naturally as wine. These people shared stories about their lives with an openness that took my breath away. Rebecca talked about rebuilding her life after divorce with a courage that inspired me. Tom shared his journey through recovery with an honesty that made everyone at the table nod with understanding and respect. Priya described her first American Thanksgiving with such enthusiasm that we all found ourselves seeing our own traditions through fresh eyes. There was something magical about watching strangers become friends over shared food and genuine conversation. I watched James help Eleanor with her coat when she got chilly. I saw Marcus offering to cut Carlos's turkey when Sophia was busy with something else. I noticed how David and Rebecca had discovered a shared love of hiking and were making plans to explore local trails together. This was what Thanksgiving was supposed to be, not a forced gathering of people bound by obligation, but a chosen celebration of gratitude and connection, not a performance of family harmony, but an authentic expression of human warmth. As the afternoon wore on and the wine flowed and the laughter grew louder, I found myself thinking about the Harper family sitting around Patricia's dining room table. I wondered if Daniel was awkwardly trying to integrate Jessica into conversations she couldn't possibly follow. I wondered if Marianne was making her usual passive-aggressive comments about the food or the decorations. I wondered if anyone at that table was having even a fraction of the genuine fun we were having here. But mostly, I found myself not thinking about them at all. For the first time in over a decade, I was completely present in my own life, surrounded by people who had chosen to be here, creating memories that belonged entirely to me. At 6:30, As we were clearing the dinner plates and preparing for dessert, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting any more guests, and for a moment, I felt a flutter of concern, but nothing could have prepared me for what I saw when I opened the front door. Daniel stood on my porch, with Jessica beside him and Marianne just behind them, all of them looking like they had swallowed something particularly unpleasant. For a moment, time seemed suspended. Daniel stood there in his expensive wool coat, looking exactly like the man I had once loved, and exactly like the man who had systematically destroyed my self-worth for over a decade. Jessica clung to his arm like a life preserver, her young face pinched with obvious discomfort. Behind them, Marianne wore the expression of someone who had come to inspect a crime scene. "Rachel," Daniel said, his voice carrying that familiar tone of forced reasonableness that had once made me question my own sanity. We were in the neighborhood and thought we'd stop by to see how you were doing." In the neighborhood, my house was 12 miles from Patricia's place, down a winding country road that led nowhere else. They had made a deliberate trip, and we all knew it. "How thoughtful," I replied, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Please, come in." The three of them stepped into my foyer, and I watched their faces as they took in the scene before them. The sound of genuine laughter and animated conversation drifted from the dining room. Through the archway, they could see my beautifully set table, the flickering candles, the elegant chaos of a meal shared among friends. The kitchen was visible beyond that, where Maria was arranging desserts on silver platters while several of my guests helped with the cleanup. Jessica's eyes went wide as she absorbed the obvious expense of everything around her, the crystal chandelier, the original artwork, the Persian rugs that probably cost more than she made in 6 months. This wasn't the pathetic scene of a lonely divorced woman that she had clearly been expecting. Marianne's face went through a series of micro-expressions that would have been comical if they weren't so transparent: surprise, envy, calculation, and finally, poorly concealed anger. My goodness, Rachel, this is quite elaborate. "Thank you. We're just finishing dinner. Would you like to meet my guests?" I could see Daniel doing the math in his head, calculating the cost of what he was witnessing. During our marriage, he had controlled every purchase, questioned every expense, made me feel guilty for wanting nice things. "We're not the Rockefellers, Rachel," he used to say whenever I admired something beautiful. "We need to live within our means." But here I was, clearly living far beyond any means he had ever imagined I could achieve on my own. "This is quite a crowd," Daniel said, attempting his old tone of gentle condescension. "I hope you're not in over your head with all this." Before I could respond, Eleanor appeared at my elbow, her teacher instincts apparently triggered by the tension in the air. "Rachel, dear, is everything all right?" "Everything's perfect. Eleanor, I'd like you to meet some people who just stopped by. This is Daniel, my ex-husband, his girlfriend Jessica, and his sister Marianne. This is Eleanor Peterson, one of my dear friends." Eleanor extended her hand with the gracious dignity of someone who had spent decades managing difficult parents and administrators. "How lovely to meet you. Rachel has created such a wonderful celebration. You're welcome to join us for dessert if you'd like." The offer hung in the air like a challenge. I could see Marianne calculating whether staying would give her more ammunition for future criticism or whether leaving would make them look petty. Jessica seemed frozen between curiosity about the house and obvious discomfort with the entire situation. "We don't want to intrude," Daniel said, but his eyes were still moving around the foyer, taking inventory of my life without him. "Not at all," I said smoothly. "Though I should mention, we're just about to start sharing what we're grateful for this year. It's become quite a moving tradition." James appeared next, having clearly sensed that his hostess might need backup. At 73, with his military bearing and no-nonsense demeanor, he had a presence that commanded respect. "Ma'am," he said to me, "the young lady asked me to tell you that dessert is ready when you are." "James, I'd like you to meet Daniel, Jessica, and Marianne. James is a veteran who served 3 tours in Vietnam. Daniel, who had gotten a college deferment and never served a day in his life, automatically straightened up and extended his hand. "Thank you for your service, sir." "Pleasure," James replied, his handshake firm and his assessment of Daniel swift and apparently unfavorable. By now, several other guests had noticed the commotion and drifted toward the foyer. Sophia appeared with Emma and Carlos, curious about the newcomers. Marcus and Tyler emerged from the library, where they had been examining my book collection. David came from the kitchen, where he had been helping Maria arrange the dessert display. The contrast was stark and deliberate. My guests were relaxed, happy, glowing with the warmth of good food and genuine companionship. They moved through my house like they belonged there, because I had made sure they knew they did. Daniel, Jessica, and Marianne stood in the center of it all like actors who had wandered onto the wrong stage. "This is quite a gathering," Marianne said, her voice tight with something that might have been envy. "It must have been so much work for you to coordinate all this." "Not really," I replied. "When people genuinely want to be somewhere, the logistics tend to work themselves out." The barb hit its target. Marianne's face flushed slightly, and I could see her remembering the phone call where she had disinvited me from their family gathering. Jessica finally spoke up, her voice small and uncertain. "Your house is really beautiful." "Thank you. I'm quite happy here." Daniel was still looking around like he was conducting an appraisal. "This must have cost—" "More than we could ever afford together." I finished for him. "Yes, it did. Fortunately, I can afford it on my own now." The silence that followed was heavy with implications. During our marriage, Daniel had convinced me that I was financially dependent on him, that I could never make it on my own, that leaving him would mean a life of struggle and want. Standing in my $2 million house surrounded by friends who genuinely cared about me, that lie was exposed for what it had always been, a tool of control. Eleanor, bless her, stepped into the awkward pause with the skill of someone who had managed thousands of difficult social situations. "Rachel, should we move to the living room for dessert? I think everyone is eager to try those beautiful pies." "What a wonderful idea," I said. "Daniel, Jessica, Marianne, you're welcome to stay if you'd like. Though I should warn you, we were about to go around the room and each share something we're grateful for this year. I find it's one of the most meaningful parts of the evening." I could see them calculating the risks. Staying would mean acknowledging that I had created something beautiful without them, something they clearly envied, but leaving now would look like retreat, like admission that they had been wrong about my ability to thrive without their family's approval. The decision was made for them when little Emma tugged on Jessica's coat. "Are you Rachel's family? Do you want to hear about the gratitude circle? It's really nice. Everyone says something that made them happy." Jessica looked down at the child with an expression of genuine confusion, as if she couldn't quite process the idea that a stranger's child would want to include her in something positive. And in that moment, I realized that whatever they chose to do next would determine not just how this evening ended, but how the rest of my story would begin. "We should go," Marianne said quickly, clearly recognizing the trap they had walked into. "We don't want to impose on your gathering." But I wasn't going to let them escape that easily, not after years of their subtle cruelty, not after the phone call that had started this entire chain of events, and certainly not after they had driven 12 miles out of their way to inspect my new life. "Please, stay for just a few minutes," I said, my voice warm but firm. "I insist. After all, we're practically family." The word practically hung in the air like a blade. We all knew I was no longer family, that they had made that crystal clear, but walking away now would only emphasize how thoroughly they had cut me out of their circle. Daniel, Jessica, and Marianne found themselves swept along as my guests moved into the living room, where Maria had arranged an impressive dessert spread on the coffee table and side tables. Eleanor's pies sat alongside professional quality tiramisu, chocolate mousse, and an array of pastries that looked like they belonged in a high-end bakery. My guests settled into the comfortable seating arrangements I had carefully planned: the sectional sofa, the wingback chairs, the window seat overlooking the mountains. Daniel, Jessica, and Marianne perched awkwardly on the remaining chairs, looking like visitors at a party they hadn't been invited to. Which, of course, they were. Now then," I said, settling into my favorite armchair with a crystal glass of wine. "This has become one of my favorite Thanksgiving traditions. We go around the room and each person shares something they're genuinely grateful for this year. Eleanor, would you like to start?" Eleanor smiled, completely at ease despite the obvious tension. "I'm grateful for new friendships that remind me that it's never too late to start over. And I'm grateful for Rachel, who showed me that hospitality isn't about obligation, it's about love." The words hit their target perfectly. I watched Marianne's face tighten as she processed the implicit criticism of families who treat gatherings as obligations rather than celebrations. James went next. "I'm grateful for discovering that loneliness is a choice, not a permanent condition. And I'm grateful for people who understand that family is something you build, not something you're born into." Each sharing became more pointed, though I hadn't planned it that way. My guests, perhaps sensing the undercurrents in the room, seemed to naturally gravitate toward themes of chosen family, new beginnings, and the courage to leave toxic situations behind. Sophia spoke about finding the strength to pursue her dreams despite being a single mother. "I'm grateful for people who see potential instead of problems, who offer support instead of judgment." Marcus and Tyler shared their gratitude for finding acceptance after being rejected by their families. "We're grateful for people who understand that love is love and that real family celebrates happiness instead of judging it." David talked about discovering that home isn't a place but a feeling. "I'm grateful for learning that the people who truly matter will always make room for you at their table." Rebecca spoke about rebuilding her life after divorce. "I'm grateful for learning the difference between people who drain your energy and people who restore it." With each sharing, I watched Daniel, Jessica, and Marianne shrink a little further into their chairs. They were witnessing a masterclass in authentic gratitude, surrounded by people who had found genuine joy and connection despite, or perhaps because of, being rejected by their original families. When it was my turn, I stood up, wine glass in hand, and looked around the room at faces that had become dear to me in just a few hours. "I'm grateful for being forced to discover who I really am when I'm not trying to fit into spaces that were never meant for me," I began, my voice steady and clear. "I'm grateful for learning that the right people will never make you feel like you're too much or not enough. I'm grateful for this house, which has become a home not because of what it cost, but because of who I've chosen to fill it with." I paused, letting my eyes rest briefly on Daniel, Jessica, and Marianne before continuing. "Most of all, I'm grateful for the phone call that changed everything. Sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is showing you exactly where you don't belong, because it forces you to create somewhere you do." The room erupted in applause, not polite dinner party clapping, but genuine, enthusiastic appreciation. My guests understood exactly what I had said and what it meant. They had all experienced rejection and exclusion, and they recognized the power of transforming that pain into something beautiful. As the applause died down, every eye in the room turned to Daniel, Jessica, and Marianne. The expectation was clear: it was their turn to share what they were grateful for. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Daniel opened his mouth twice, but no words came out. How could he possibly express gratitude while sitting in the home of the woman he had betrayed, surrounded by people who had created the kind of authentic connection he had never been capable of fostering? Jessica stared at her hands, clearly wishing she could disappear. Marianne's face had gone pale with the realization that she was trapped in a moment of her own making. Finally, Marianne stood up abruptly. "We really do need to go. Patricia will be wondering where we are." "Of course," I said graciously, standing as well. "Let me walk you out." As we reached the foyer, I could hear my guests behind us, already moving back into easy conversation and laughter. The house pulsed with warmth and joy that would continue long after the uncomfortable visitors had left. At the front door, Mary Ann turned back for one last look at the life I had built without them. "Rachel, I hope you understand that we never meant—" "I understand perfectly." I cut her off, my voice kind but final. "I understand that you gave me the greatest gift you could have given, even though you didn't mean to. You freed me." As their car pulled away, disappearing down my winding driveway into the darkness, I stood in my doorway for a moment, breathing in the crisp November air and listening to the sound of genuine laughter coming from my living room. I had won, not because I had hurt them or embarrassed them, but because I had discovered something infinitely more valuable than their approval. I had learned how to create the life I actually wanted, instead of settling for the one I thought I deserved. "Behind me!" Eleanor called out. "Rachel, dear, come back. David is about to tell us about his grandmother's recipe for Korean sweet potato dessert, and Emma wants to know if she can help make it next time she visits." Next time she visits? The words filled me with a warmth that had nothing to do with wine or fireplaces or expensive furnishings. I had found my people, and they had found me. I closed the door on my old life and walked back toward my new one, where 37 people who had chosen to be here were waiting to continue our celebration. The best revenge, I realized, wasn't making them pay for what they had taken from me. It was building something so beautiful without them that their absence became a blessing instead of a loss. Thank you so much for listening to this story of transformation and triumph. I'd love to hear from you. Where are you listening to this story from today? Drop a comment below and let's connect with fellow listeners from around the world. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to our channel and share your thoughts about second chances, chosen family, and the courage it takes to rebuild your life on your own terms.